Good evening, friends. Good evening here at the National Opera Center. Good evening to those who are following on our live stream, and hello to anyone who's going to be watching this once the recording is posted to our website. So welcome all. And we're here for a really, really important program that is exploring a collaborative project between OperaCréole and Opera Lafayette. And I think it is a really unique and wonderful exploration of an extremely important work. Here we are at the beginning of Black History Month, but way beyond the confines of the 21st or 20th century, we go back to the 19th century, to 1887 and the premiere of an opera by Edmond Dédé. And we're going to hear about it, about the discovery of it, about creating a performance edition of it, a co-production, and a performance that's taking place tomorrow evening here at Jazz at Lincoln Center, which is between performances in the Washington, D.C. area before it also is performed in New Orleans. So a remarkable journey for an historic work by an important composer we're going to learn more about this evening. We have a panel of experts who are going to really illuminate the story of the opera and behind the opera. Giovanna Joseph, who is the founder and artistic director of OperaCréole, Eldrick Bashful, the general director of Opera Ebony, Patrick Quigley, who's a conductor and the artistic director designate of Opera Lafayette, and Lisa Mion, who's the managing director of Opera Lafayette. So without further ado, please welcome them to the stage. Great to see you. Please come around. I'll take the seat over here. Normally our conversations are one-on-one, but now it's four-on-one, and it's going to make for a really good discussion. Welcome all. And you have handheld mics, so that way you can be heard not only in the room, but also for the live stream and for the recording of the session. But you know, I always start out by asking everyone, and I'm not letting you off the hook, I want to hit a couple of sentences. Who brought you to your first opera? Giovanna, I'm going to start with you.
Ironically, my first opera was as a Loyola student. New Orleans Opera hired some Loyola students as choristers for Lohengrin. And my parents, who had promised me as a young kid, no matter what it is that you want to do, we've got you, we will be there. They were there and they were still smiling 3 hours later.
Oh, so it was a cut version. They cut out an act. Well, so you brought yourself to your first opera? And brought your parents along with you?
Yes.
Patrick, how about you? Who brought you to your first opera?
I have a similar story to Giovanna in that I was a freshman in college and was dragooned into a production of Oedipus Rex by Stravinsky.
Wow.
And it was wonderful, and I've been fascinated by it ever since.
Wow, so again, you brought yourself to your first opera. Eldrick.
I was thinking.
There we go.
I was thinking about that question, and I can't really say. But what I can say is that the first opera that I did was in the children's chorus of New Orleans Opera for, we did La Bohème, Tosca, Hérodíade, and Carmen over a 2-year period. So those were my first stage experiences, and I do remember those.
Sure, sure. Now, Patrick, you're also from New Orleans, aren't you?
I am, yes.
Lisa, how about you?
Well, I will have to join the ranks of Giovanna and Patrick in that although we had a lot of music in my house when I was growing up, I did not attend my first opera until I was a nascent stage manager and was ASMing an opera, and it was Traviata, and I sat backstage on opening night listening to that glorious overture, and thank God I didn't have any cues to call because I wept.
Oh, and where was that?
That was in Baltimore.
In Baltimore, fantastic. Okay, well, great to know what your opera roots are, and we'll take it from there. And you know, Giovanna, I want to start with you because you have an absolutely encyclopedic knowledge of the culture of New Orleans and Louisiana, but specifically New Orleans. And I'm just wondering, in you went to Loyola. When did you want to master the cultural history of your city? When did that become a quest for you?
Oh my goodness. I think probably right before Katrina hit. When I was education director for the LPO, I started looking into a lot of different things and wanting to see if we could expand what the orchestra was doing at the time. And I joined the Louisiana Creole Research Association, which really kind of started the ball going for me. And but always as a kid, I kept saying, when people would say, why do you like that? Why are you doing that and you're studying that? We don't do that. And I kept thinking, I can't be that weird. There's got to be other people that have been doing this. It's just, if it's feeling so strong for me, it can't be that it's just me. So there was always a curiosity. But it was around that time that I really started to look into, especially early opera singers, and Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, Born a Slave, and people like that. It kind of kicked it off for me.
So the Louisiana Creole Research Association.
Yeah.
How remarkable.
Yeah.
Does it still exist today?
Oh yeah, it's a great organization, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I learned so much through working with them, and I served on their board for a while. But that's when I really started to learn more about our history in opera and classical music in 19th century New Orleans, which is just phenomenal.
An incredibly rich history of singers and of creative artists as we're exploring today.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So you have brought to the spotlight through your research an incredible number of works. I was reading in some of the background material about Samuel Coleridge Taylor's Thelma, William Grant Still's Minette Fontaine, Lucien Lambert's La Flamenca. So how do you conduct your research? What is the process by which you conduct it?
There's so many different ways that I've gone about it, and sometimes things come in concert with talking with other historians. But the Amistad Research Center was one of the first places, Tulane's Music Archives, and online, but working with Dominique René de Lerma, who was had the Afro-Classical website. He was the one that said, they just found this opera that's been sitting in a drawer in Croydon, England for 100 years, and they're going to publish it. And I said, that's it, we've got to do it. And Eldrick was actually in that production of Samuel Coleridge Taylor's Thelma, which was sort of a mix of Wagnerian and magic flute. But beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous music. We want to do that one again. Minette Fontaine just blew my mind when I found out that William Grant Still actually wrote it for New Orleans and set it in New Orleans in 1958, and then the company did not accept it. And it was later done by Baton Rouge Opera sometime in the 1980s, and we finally brought it to New Orleans. And it's incredible because it's about this woman who comes to New Orleans to sing in the French Opera House, and she is attracted to this young man and goes to Marie Laveau for a voodoo spell to get him to fall in love with her. So it's a lot of fun.
So you read, you talk to people, you just pay attention to what's going on, and these discoveries are available to you.
Yeah.
Now, I don't imagine that you can then get on Amazon and get a score for these works.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Where do you go from having heard about a work? Where do you go to actually finding it?
Well, the La Flamenca score I actually wrote to Bibliothèque Nationale because Lucien Lambert, who's the son of a New Orleans free composer of color, Charles Lucien Lambert, debuted the opera in 1903, 10 days after Massenet opened the season. He was a student of Massenet. And so I wrote to the Bibliothèque Nationale and got the piano vocal score of La Flamenca. And so it's been going in different directions like that. I wrote to William Grant Still's daughter, and got the Minette Fontaine from her. So now, but Dédé's Morgiane, that was a whole nother ball of wax.
Oh, we'll get there in a second. And I want to also explore this connection between New Orleans and France. And of course, you know, the French occupied and defined New Orleans for a while, not for a terribly long while, because it was, you know, French and Spanish and an amazingly mixed culture. What was it that drew these composers to France? Was it because they had the introduction to French culture in New Orleans? Was France particularly welcoming of these creative artists?
Well, we definitely had wonderful French culture in New Orleans. And because we had our first opera season in 1796, and because we started this whole being the home of opera, we attracted teachers from France, composers from France. We debuted over 200 operas in New Orleans, in America for the first time. And so there was some relationship building there. But because France had abolished slavery, they were certainly open to our coming, and then they abolished it again. And so by the time that they made it there, they had managed to do it twice. But always welcoming, and we continued to see that. We saw that in the explosion of jazz. We saw that Harlem Renaissance. We saw that it was just a welcoming place for us in our artistry, and so that was one of the reasons that. And Dédé was not the first to go there.
Right.
Yes.
So interesting. Well, thank you for that. We're going to come to Dédé in a minute, but I wanted to turn to Patrick, and you have such a wide spectrum of musical interests and activity, but you're really focused on music of the Baroque period as a particular specialty, Opera Lafayette. What draws you to this music, the Baroque period and the undiscovered works?
That's a great question. I think that there is a purity about the music of the 18th century. I would hate to say that it was just the Baroque period, but that in particular the music of the time of the Enlightenment, when we begin to step away from the church as the center of music and see individual composers stepping out as their own creative forces. If we think about Handel as sort of being the Andrew Lloyd Webber of his time, it's really amazing what people will do when they are released from the strictures of patronage and or having to be within a very specific artistic idea. And so I think that, the music of the 18th century is where I actually started out in the music of Gregorian chant and polyphony is sort of where my roots began. But to see how composers used that almost as composers from the 18th century used the music of Palestrina and Tomás Luis Vittoria as a way, as a departure point on which to create these larger structures and more fanciful ideas in music. That's sort of why the 18th century is something that's close to my heart.
And of course, Opera Lafayette does a number of works in the repertoire that we've never heard, maybe never even heard of. How do you do your research to find a piece that you think is stage-worthy?
Sure. I mean, I was lucky to grow up as a child of a professor at Loyola University, which has a really probably the best music library in the state of Louisiana. And I was a young musician in the beginning of high school, and he would just drop me off at the music library, and I would go through the stacks and pull things off and look at them. And I continued that through my life. I think that music libraries are some of the most fantastical places that one can exist, and just to be able to say, well, what's this? And with the advent of the internet and particularly for music and documents from the 18th century through IMSLP and many other online archives. You can do this with a click now. And some people go down YouTube rabbit holes. I go down IMSLP rabbit holes. Or living in Washington, D.C., it's very easy to go to the Library of Congress and spend a day and say, I see that you have this piece, I've never heard of it by so-and-so. And once you begin to know a librarian, they will bring you things. You become a familiar face at a library. People are like, do you see what's out here? So like BWV 11, box Cantata 11 is just happens to be out from the vault today. Would you like to see Bach's handwriting? Yes, absolutely.
So that's how you do research, but then there is that decision point of, okay, this is worthy of a production.
Yep.
This is stage worthy. What criteria do you use to decide whether or not something should be put on the stage?
Sure. I mean, my primary feeling about whether it is opera or music that I would bring to a symphony orchestra or with a chorus are the notes on the page compelling? Is there something about the music that I play it on the piano, or I sit with it in manuscript? Does it say something different than something that I've heard before, or does it riff on something that I've heard before in a different way? And I think that if the music itself is compelling, that is a great basis for drama. Because even if maybe it's a slow to build drama, if that is done with music that keeps your ear and thus your mind involved, it's going to make for a great night at the theater.
Irrespective of the story or the narrative,
Yes.
So for you, it really is music driven.
Music first. If it is great music, then then you look at text, you look at the story surrounding it. But I think that we are all musical organizations first, and if the music is good, that is the starting point, and then there is more good music out there than we can perform in our lifetimes. So there's no reason to ever perform like middling music, I think.
Okay, fair enough. What makes Dédé so special? Let me go back to you, Giovanna. What makes Dédé so special? So special generally and so special to you?
He's special to me because I always say he's an example of how to make a way out of no way, how to get through difficulties and yet do everything you can to be who you were born to be. He's inspiration to me in that way. He's so special because he was an incredible composer. The more you look at his work and you can see how it just continued to grow, how he was able to flex from one musical style to another musical style, from the opera house to, the kind of a Broadway scene, and how he was able to make people laugh through classical music and tell serious stories and open his heart in the way that he spoke through his music. I always say that there's a thread that runs through everything that he does that says, I am valuable, value me, value my heart, value my position, value my worth, and that speaks to me quite a bit.
I know he was born in 1827.
Yes.
And this opera is 1887 when he was 60.
Yes.
He died, I think, 1902, if I remember
1901.
correctly. And in 1901, same year as Verdi, nice residence there. But he did spend, I guess, more of his life in France than in New Orleans.
Yes. Yes.
Once he went to France, did he go back to New Orleans, or was it one move only?
He tried to go. He went back once, and it was so inhospitable. He said, "Never again."
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he came back to New Orleans in 1893, and he was shipwrecked, and another ship picked him up, took him to Galveston, Texas. He performed some concerts there. He lost his violin, but they the community rallied and he got him another violin, I read. But when he got to New Orleans, all of a sudden, they would not let him perform in any of the theaters. The Citizens Committee got together and put on concerts in churches and in their homes. And it was, the height of Jim Crow laws.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways for him, it was worse than it was before the Civil War. So he said, never again. And he wrote Patriotisme, that was his farewell, which I'm trying to find. But yeah, never came back.
Who discovered or who brought to the table, who called whom first? There's this opera, the only opera of Dédé. Who's the one who brought it to the table?
Well, I got a digital copy burned on CD for me. Every time I say that, it sounds so ancient now. But the digital copy was burned for me. Lester Sullivan, Xavier University's archivist, provided it to me in 2012.
Because it was there, the opera?
Yes, Harvard had sent it to Xavier. Yeah, and so I received the copy then and spent many years begging, trying to get it done. And then independently, Patrick found it. And luckily, a singer who had worked with both of us, said, you should talk to Giovanna Joseph.
Who's in the production?
Yeah, who's in this production.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2012, you began hunting this down and getting it. And how about you?
I came in contact with Edmond Dédé as a composer at the end of 2020. My parents have library. My father's sort of a book addict, and had bought a book from a New Orleans library called 19th Century Concert Life in New Orleans, which he thought might be like a light read, which it was not. But so he gave it to me, and I started reading it during the latter part of the pandemic, and they began talking about Edmond Dédé in one of the chapters there. And from there, I actually read a book from the 1870s by James Trotter called Some Music and Some Highly Musical People, which documented the contributions of Black Americans to classical music in the 19th century, which, I have an undergraduate degree in music history and theory, and when we start to talk about early music in America, beyond William Billings, who's a revolutionary composer, we talk about Copland and Ives and Joplin, and these are basically 20th century composers. So that the 19th century is completely devoid of people that we know. And so knowing that there was this community of composers of color who had been in my hometown, who had grown up blocks and miles away from where I had grown up, it was shocking. And so I sort of went down a rabbit hole, and eventually led me to the Harvard Library's website, where they have a scan of Morgiane available online, just sort of sitting there. And so that's where I found it.
And a scan of what?
There's a 550-page handwritten manuscript, a single manuscript. It's fully orchestrated. It's a complete 4-act opera. It's in the hands of probably 4 to 5 people, Dédé's scribal assistants, and then with his edits in it. And it's a fascinating. It's in 2 volumes. It's a gigantic score. It's on display currently at the Folger Shakespeare Library. And it's actually open to the page at the point at which there are many plot twists, but the ultimate plot twist happens. And so they have a high resolution scan of those 545 pages.
And the score itself, if it's not the Folger, lives at Harvard?
It lives at Harvard. Yes.
And how did it come to be there? Do you know?
Well, we sort of
we
just
finding out.
So we were really lucky over while we were workshopping this work at Cincinnati Opera. we were contacted by a reporter at the New York Times, Keith O'Brien, who's written a number of book-length works, but also writes long-form newspaper journalism. And he came and sat in on the workshops and talked with us, and then spent the next 3 or 4 months looking to find out where the score came from. And so the score at some point in the first half of the 20th century passed from whoever Dédé gave it to into the hands of a private music collector in Paris. And it sat with a collection of about 10,000 scores in basically a barn outside of Paris, in a suburb outside of Paris. And Harvard, they decided it was an international collection of handwritten music manuscripts, some from Asia. It's not just European music, and there are probably about 10 organizations in the world who could purchase this collection when it went on sale by its owners. Harvard happened to purchase it in 2000, and a researcher and cataloging librarian who's going to be at the show tomorrow night, we're going to meet her for the first time, had just taken a course on music of free composers of color in American 19th century, and had been reading about it, and so saw this score and said, we should, of these 10,000 works, we should really scan this and put this online. And so that happened in, I think probably in 2008, as they were cataloging this gigantic collection that they had acquired in 2000. And so through that way, it came to both Giovanna and I in separate ways, and we were connected when we were both looking at it.
Wow, I mean, it should be a reality TV.
Yes.
But
it goes to show you that one person's decision can make all the difference.
That
We
is
would
what
have
is so
never
wonderful.
had it had she not decided to scan it.
It's so serendipitous, and it makes you think of what is lost, given
Right.
how rare it is that this was found.
Yeah.
But a burned disc of a scan of a
Yes.
500 is not violin parts. You know, how do you go from that to having a performance edition that had parts?
Woo-wee.
Slowly.
Lots of prayers first. Lots of prayers.
We have been, when we decided that we would move forward with this,
So let me pause there. So who is the singer who put the two of you in touch?
Jonathan Woody.
And how did that happen?
So Ryan Brown, the founder and artistic director of Opera Lafayette, when we had been talking about this piece for a while, and he said, I really think that for our 30th anniversary, I'd like to present this. Would you consider doing this? I said, yeah. And he said, I looked online, and it sounds like that there is a mother-daughter team in New Orleans who has been working on this, and maybe they've already done it, and maybe they have a copy of this score. And our Jonathan had just been down to New Orleans to work with OperaCréole, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'll put you guys in touch on Zoom." And so we had a Zoom meeting. Yeah,
okay, so that's how the connection happened. You decided to do it, and then now we have to try to produce this thing. So how did you create a score and parts and all?
Sure. I've been working with a team of engravers who have, first we entered in all of the individual notes, the tens of thousands of individual notes, performance indications, dynamics, and libretto into Sibelius, which is a music notation software. Once the full score was into the computer, but before we began editing it, we sent it to another engraver who then arranged it for piano, so that we could have a piano vocal score, so that the leads could begin to work on it. While then we went through, edited the individual parts within the full score, and then extracted them into individual orchestral parts. And we talk about it right now as if it's that this process is finished. But we opened last night And in the dress rehearsal earlier yesterday, we were going through with members of the orchestra who were like, is this an E or an F? I mean, really? And normally these are questions that when you do a premiere with a living composer, you walk up to them and say, did you really mean an A natural there? And they're like, do whatever you want, do whatever you want. And so, but we are collaborating with a team that has been dead for 100 years. And so...
Ouija board?
Yes. But what it means is that every member of the cast, every member of the orchestra, every member of the chorus, all of the coaches are co-collaborators with Dédé and his team, because normally when we give a modern premiere of a work, it's been performed, it's been engraved, someone has performed it, someone has seen every note. This is just a spec score. And so what we're doing is what would be the final proof of the work, even now. So, and we'll perform it tomorrow night in New York. We have a sound check at 2:30. I'm sure that there will be questions about, last night I'm not sure that this,
Wow.
Yeah.
In a minute, we'll learn more of what the opera is about and all of that. Eldrick, how did you become involved in this?
Giovanna.
Mm-hmm.
So when I returned home to New Orleans after being away for many years, I ran away from my doctorate program. You know if you know. And immediately, so the backstory is I've known Giovanna forever as a child. She was the best friend of my neighbor literally across the street. So almost every weekend, hi Giovanna, hi Eldrick. And I knew she was a singer. Back then I had no aspirations whatsoever. But as I started singing, and especially coming back home, I don't know if you reached out or I reached out, we quickly came together and pulled me into the fold. And very early on, after the Coolidge, there were murmurs about the Dédé. Nothing solid, but I have been hearing of it for a long time. And I know that Giovanna has put a lot of hours, sleepless nights, trying to get the information, find out where it was, and now that she found it, how can she get to the next step? So I literally have been in an earshot of this process from the very beginning.
Wow, how great, how great. Now, the workshop, so how long ago was the workshop? Lisa, were you involved in working on it in Cincinnati with everyone?
Well, I was fortunate because I got to go at the end of the workshop and reap the benefit of hearing all the good work that Patrick and the team there had done, which was really quite phenomenal because we were literally a group of people hearing that work of this long dead composer for the first time ever. And our great thanks goes out to Cincinnati Opera and to the singers and Evans, of course, who's here, and to the singers that they provided, on whom that work is really, they were the building blocks for where we are now, because Patrick, they helped you make decisions, they helped you learn a lot about that score, because the piano vocal score was, of course, very new. So it was wonderful to be sitting in on that, given the long lead-up process to having that PV.
So, workshop, and here you don't have a composer in the room, and I guess you are deciding what the performance version will be. Are you performing the entire work? Did you make some judicious cuts because you felt we can make this better in a dramaturgical or musical way?
We are presenting it. So, to be clear, we are doing a concert version of this in costume tomorrow. So this is still sort of, in some way, you get to hear the music, you get to sort of see the characters perform it, and we hope that some endeavoring person who is perhaps even watching now will hear this music and see the drama play and say, this is something that we would like to stage,
Mhm,
because it has not, it has not yet and does not have a staging scheduled. So what we did, one of the great things about the workshop is that the workshop gives you deadlines. This was a conversation where it was, I think April, Evan said to us, hey, do you want to come at the end of July to put on this workshop? And we said, oh my God, this would be so amazing. Yes, please.
2024?
The 2024, yes.
Okay.
And we said yes, and he says, great, can you get me a final piano vocal score in a month? And we were like, oh my God. I remember being on the phone with Giovanna, I was like, okay, tell me yes. And so we got, but even the week before the workshop, each member of the cast got I think 100-page set of errata of like, these are wrong, these are absolutely wrong notes or wrong text underlay. And then in those workshops, people sing and say, this is really great, I love this. I don't understand why this word is here, where it would make much more sense for this to be one note later, it will fall this way, it will sing better. And that's the type of, because, in a spec manuscript, the librettist is most often just writing in the words under music that has been composed, and so it doesn't necessarily mean that was going to be the final placement. It's just like showing where the music would be. This is where we go, and once we engrave it, we'll figure out the details. And so we were left to figure out the details.
Wow.
And for singers, certain vowels and things, where they're placed is very important. So we learned a lot from them.
I think the other amazing thing that we learned, though, is just how catchy the tunes in this show are. Because every night we would go home like, I can't get this out of my mind. I'm watching Law and Order, and I'm like hearing, and that's, I know we're going to get to it at some point, but one of the remarkable things about this work is just how much facility Dédé has with melody. It is so catchy and so familiar in a way that, like, when you heard Sound of Music for the first time, you're like, well, this is like music that's been with me my whole life. I'm sure of it. Like, this is just, they're singing it because this is part of it. It felt so familiar.
So, Giovanna, what's it about? It is, subtitled, or the Sultan of Isfahan, which I looked up and is an old city several hundred miles south of Tehran.
Yeah.
So what is it about?
It's originally Persia, a section of Persia. It's based on the Alibaba stories. There's Ali, who's in love with Amin. They get married in Arabia, and just at the time of the marriage, the Sultan sends his henchmen to grab Amin. He had seen her, beautiful woman. He wanted her as part of his harem. And so she gets snatched from her wedding to go and be with the Sultan. What is wonderful in the twist about the way he handles it, none of their characters are enslaved as the Alibaba stories would be. And they, instead of saying, oh, well, he snatched my child, oh, poor thing, poor is me, woe is me, and then they were like, no, we're going to go get her. And so they cross the deserts of Arabia and go into Persia and pretend to be singers of legendary stories to infiltrate the palace to get her back. And the Sultan is not understanding, because also Amin is not being cooperative. She's not, she's not feeling honored in this situation. Which is supposedly, that's what she's supposed to feel. So she fights against him, and he's feeling this love for her, but he can't figure out why, his power and his sultanness is not working. So it's in a way he treats the story as an anti-subjugation story, but it's a dark comedy. So Morgiane was his sultan. And she escaped from him because he was cruel at the time. Right after their daughter was born, She escapes into Arabia, and Haji Hassan takes her in and raises her. And so when they go and they pretend to be these singers, and they're telling him through these songs that he's about to commit a crime, he doesn't like that. He puts him in jail. And Morgiane says, but I have a secret that will get us out of jail and will save our lives. And that's where the story twists.
Okay. No spoiler here. Wow, so 4 acts.
Yes.
And how much music altogether?
I mean, there's probably over 3 hours of music if we were to perform the full 4 acts with ballet. We are performing a concert version that is 140 minutes total, so 70 minutes, 2 halves, Act 1 and 2 on the first half, Act 3 and 4 on the second.
So he wrote a ballet in great French tradition.
Yes, ballet. There are 2 ballets.
2 ballets,
Yes,
got it.
2 ballets,
Got it.
yes.
Yeah, we know a lot of operas with ballets.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, this is a collaboration between 2 companies. And Lisa, have you been at the center of this collaborative effort here?
Oh, she has. She has.
There's been a lot going on. Yeah, it's been a wonderful opportunity to get to understand more about the New Orleans operatic history, of which there's a great deal, and to have the opportunity to work with your chorus, to arrange for her chorus to get up here to try and schedule rehearsals.
So, chorus from OperaCréole.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
So
And
the
Opera
Opera Creole ensemble
Uh-huh.
comprises our chorus, and then Opera Lafayette musicians, instrumentalists are making up our orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
So, Patrick has spent some time in New Orleans working with the chorus down there,
Yeah.
and there's been a lot of logistical things to manage.
Yeah.
And a lot of partnership to build long distance without being in the room with one another.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point you think, well, you're done with that after 2022, but here we are, and it's been a great opportunity and a great partnerip built between the 2 companies.
Absolutely.
And
Been quite a blessing.
I'm
Really has.
happy to hear you say the same thing, Siobhan.
Yes. Yes.
The performance schedule is an interesting one where you opened last night, was it?
Yes.
In Washington.
Correct.
And then are here in New York for tomorrow night, but then are going back to the DC area for a performance at University of Maryland College Park.
Where we'll record it.
Okay.
And I think that recording goes back to something really important that you spoke about earlier briefly and that Patrick alluded to, which was how do you determine when an opera is stage-worthy? Well, lots of companies make that determination based on how available the music is.
Absolutely.
Right? And if you have a work like this, a really worthy piece of music that doesn't have a performance score and that's never been recorded, as a company, that work might begin to look much less desirable because, as we can attest, it's kind of difficult to create a performance score of a 550-page manuscript. So part of our goal in this project ultimately is to extend the life of this work, to ensure that Dédé, now that he's back home, is celebrated and that music is heard. And at the end of this project, we will have a score and we will have an audio recording so that other companies can look at this work and really make an informed decision about the music and the worthiness and not on the difficulty of putting it all together.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. How many cast members?
There are 6 cast members, 16 in the chorus, and for Opera Lafayette, a stunningly large orchestra of 48?
50 period, and we're doing it with all period instruments as well. So
Even though it's 1887, still period instruments.
yeah, so the strings are all playing on gut strings. The horns are switching crooks every 16 measures, and they're actually playing on. There's a brother-sister pair of 1880s Bordeaux horns that are in the orchestra right now. Romantic oboe. We have an ophiclyde rather than a tuba. Small bore trombones. 2 different types of trumpets. There's the sort of the lower classical trumpet, which is a crooked trumpet, as well as what was at the time the cornet. So we have 2 cornets, 2 trumpets, 3 trombones, off Clyde, 4 horns, and then double winds and strings.
And 50 in the orchestra, because the 16 chorus is a very manageable size, 6 soloists, very manageable.
Yeah.
50 because
we need that many strings in order to balance the number of winds and brass.
Okay, got it.
And 3 percussion.
And 3 percussion.
Yeah.
Terrific. Wow, and then going back and forth between cities, that's some logistics indeed.
Yes, and also the engraver lives in Pennsylvania, so just add that to the whole program.
So you talked about the gift of melody. What are some of the other musical characteristics people should listen for?
Well, I think that he is very much established in the French opera tradition in that the action really drives the music. There is never a moment where you're like, this seems a little self-indulgent. The longest aria in the piece is sung by the Sultan, and it's about 6.5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of the 140 minutes that we were performing, there are spectacular ensembles.
Oh, yeah.
The ensembles in this piece are ravishing. There's quintets, trios, 2 magnificent trios. In the 4th act, in the jail, the 4 members of the family sing an a cappella, 3-minute work that in the middle, the strings have 1 measure of pizzicato in case your quartet goes flat in the middle. And it's the variety of the types of music. So there's definitely just music from the French operetta tradition. There is popular sort of café concert music. There's absolutely music from the Italian bel canto and even Verdian sort of style in this, as well as what we would all probably recognize as a 19th century Southern Americana that is involved in this, as well as in the dance music he uses Spanish style and calypso rhythms. So there's a little bit of everything, and it is in the way that composers toward the end of their life will pick the greatest things that have been part of their work and combine them into a single artistic testament. That is what this is. It's funny, it's light, it's tuneful, it's exciting. It has both the characteristics of French Orientalism, but also very, very popular standard forms of the time.
And you answered a question partially that I was going to ask Shimona, which is whether you hear any of his New Orleans roots in the opera.
It's a perfect explanation of New Orleans, because in his roots, New Orleans was the most European, African, and Native American city simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would have grown up hearing not only the opera of the time, but rhythms that survived from Africa along the islands into Louisiana, Spanish music, that we had a relationship early on with Cuba, and even bringing opera troops up from Cuba to perform. And so this was New Orleans. This was all of the influences that he would have grown up with that seemed to come together in this opera.
Yeah.
But he spent time in Mexico.
Yes.
He spent time in Algeria, and so all of the he was an incredibly well-traveled person, and picked up various styles, rhythms, melodic fragments along the way, and incorporates them into what is absolutely an original composition.
Yeah. And I like the way you talk about how he introduces the Sultan musically.
Yeah,
I think that's just so cool.
Up until the point that the Sultan comes in, it's a very string-heavy piece. But the Sultan is introduced by wind band. His father was a clarinetist. His first instrument was clarinet. He was a virtuoso violinist. And everyone else is sort of accompanied by strings the whole time, but we realize that the Sultan is set apart by everyone because his underlying music is so different from everyone else. And so like we've left one land and moved to another, but it's not strangely that there's not a lot of Orientalist music in the singing. It's all very much sort of European style, operatic and popular styles, but he does it with leitmotifs and with orchestration in terms of letting us know who is from one place and who is from another.
Interesting. And Eldred, and you have such a long and important association with Opera Ebony.
Yes.
What does this mean to you?
This is an incredible journey for us. Being from New Orleans, being in the presence for my nearly entire life of this very driven woman. And I say that because Giovanna has such a deep root in education. And as far as I'm concerned, is one of the most, if not the pinnacle of New Orleans' contribution to the opera world in this country. And to be part of not only her life personally, but as a singer, now as an administrator, to have this collaboration with Opera Lafayette, OperaCréole, it makes sense that Opera Ebony New Orleans, though it is a New York company, the circle here is quite intense. And I will go so far to say that I hope this is just the beginning of something extremely magical for us all.
I wanted to end by asking whether there are some other works in the pipeline that you are circling around and trying to get a burned CD of a manuscript that is 400 pages, not 500 pages.
Well, one of our next projects, we've actually started just doing some scenes from it. There's another opera by Lucien Lambert, son of New Orleans. The story is amazing because in 1893, he entered a Paris-wide composition contest. And the prize was that your work would be debuted at the L'Opéra Comique. So he wrote this opera in 1893 that was he set it in Senegal, called the Spahis. And it's about a French regiment that goes to Senegal, Africa, and it takes some very interesting twists. There is an enslaved character in it, but the woman who owns her is a mute character. She gets to say nothing. This is interesting. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous music. And so we did some scenes from it in Paris this past May. And so that's one of our projects to expand on that. I just found out that the Bibliothèque Nationale has all of the orchestra parts. We only had piano vocal score that they sent us originally. So that's there. There's also another handwritten score by the wife of W.E.B. Du Bois. What am I right now? Her name's going to come to me. Shirley Graham Du Bois. An opera that she wrote that takes, it's called Tom Tom, starts off in an African village, goes to enslavement in America, and ends in the Harlem Renaissance.
Wow.
So that's a curiosity that I'm going to be looking at.
Well, I certainly hope you are training some people to walk in your incredible footsteps. Are there still tickets available for tomorrow night?
There were at 1 o'clock.
Okay.
So I would suggest that
for those in the room or those watching the live stream, get on a plane and get some tickets to see this tomorrow night. It's one performance only in New York.
correct.
And I just wish you the very, very best of luck. May it be a great success. I hope the recording goes well. And I hope that we get to hear more of this work and more of your incredible discoveries and your great collaboration.
And I want to
Please.
end with saying, last night, the probably great, I don't know how many greats it is, grandson of Edmond Dédé came from France to the performance in
Really?
D.C. last night.
Oh, how
Yes.
exciting that must
And
have
it
been.
actually turned out to be his first opera. He never
Wow. And is his last name today?
Chauvin. His
Oh.
mother was a Dédé. Yeah.
Isn't that spectacular?
Jean-Marie Chauvin. Yeah.
You are
So
bringing
the
history
family,
alive.
Yeah, and his brother who remained in New Orleans, that family was all in the New Orleans homecoming that we did after the snow almost killed us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for this. Friends, please join me in thanking these incredible scholars and This was wonderful. Thank you so much.